All right, what is up, everybody? So, with the latest content in Warframe, a lot of people are doing Netracells, myself included. We've heard in the latest dev stream that a kind of harder version of Netracell type thing is going to be coming down the line. So, since Netracells are so popular, or kind of required at this point almost, it's definitely nice to get those out of the way quickly. And some frames are definitely a little more suited to doing Netracells than others. So there's two frames in particular that I've really liked for Netracells, and this applies both solo and in a group. Now, there's a couple things to consider for Netracells. So one is a lot of the time you're spending in Netracells, I would say a significant portion of the time is literally just running around the map. Because for some reason, there's if you include the panels you need to find, or the things you need to unlock to find the Netracell, and then you have the drones, which are sometimes like randomly like a million miles away. You're basically having to go like 200 to 1,000 units away, like 5 times throughout the course of the mission. So if you're running a really slow frame, that is going to take a really long time. The other thing is obviously you want to get enemies into the red circle as fast as possible, and you want to not die. That's very important because if you die, especially if you're doing Netracell solo, if you die, it's just over. And one thing to also consider is the detrimental effects of holding the key glyphs. So those are basically either like extra damage on yourself, or there's the energy drain one that's pretty annoying, and there's a few that are status effect related. So all that put together kind of guided me towards these two frames. Now you can basically use whatever weapon you're comfortable with. I love the Fulmin. It's always been one of my favorite weapons. I think it's still my most used primary. So weapons wise, you can kind of use whatever you want. The first frame I wanted to go over was Nova. Now, please, I have to, huge disclaimer. Please do not play speed or Slova in a Netracell mission. You will probably get reported because that's just trolling your team. Now, Nova's been a little weird over the years because back when people would health tank, Nova was considered one of the tankiest warframes because at that time there was no shield gating. So Nova's Null Star. Now I really wish this was just like damage reduction in general, but for some reason Null Star's damage reduction does not apply to Nova's health, which is very strange, but it kind of is what it is. So Null Star is frankly garbage. I think that you're going to get so much more out of shield gating versus health tanking. It is so much safer to shield gate than it is to health tank. In a mission where you cannot die, if you die and you're doing a Netracell solo, it's just over. You lose the mission, you have to start over. And Netracell missions can take a pretty decent chunk of time compared to your average Warframe mission. So the number one priority is not dying. Especially with things like, the bleed status effect that you're going to get, the electricity, the void bursts. I tried messing around with some health tanking builds in Netracell, and even though it's not a Steel Path game mode, you can still kind of just die if you're playing a health tanking frame, which I really wish they would address that. I feel like shields are way too strong compared to health. I wish that they would buff health tanking a little bit, like maybe buff armor scaling or something. I don't know. Anyways, so this build is kind of assuming that Null Star is a kind of useless ability. So I replaced Nova's 2 with Pillage. Now you could replace her 1 with Pillage, honestly. I just kind of wanted it to have it there for some other builds. So what's good about Nova in this game mode is Molecular Prime and Wormhole, specifically a Speedva Molecular Prime. Now, if we look at the build, so this is not the normal Nova build from years ago. So before you would run molecular fission and you would like try to buff up your health and basically be like a health tank. This is basically a full shield build, and you're taking advantage of a negative strength molecular prime, speeding enemies up, and also wormhole plus escape velocity to zip around the map. So the range on wormhole is absolutely incredible. It is one of the best mobility abilities in the game. And then when you combine that with escape velocity, you are just zooming around the map. So why pillage? Well, Nova doesn't really like her abilities are expensive, but she doesn't cast her abilities. She doesn't spam abilities, right? She's not like Korra where she's spamming an ability to do damage. She's using her abilities every once in a while for utility. So brief respite, it's like a nice. I mean, I still kept it on the build because it's nice when you're like zipping around with wormhole. But it's not like a game breaker. The other thing is, it's really nice to have any kind of shield generation because it synergizes with Arcane Aegis. So this build is like high mobility, bringing enemies in with molecular fission, and then it's entirely dependent on shields for defense. So so a lot of duration as per normal with Nova builds. So I'm running Prime Continuity and Narrow Minded. I honestly don't think you need much more than that. Like in the past, you would stack duration as high as possible to get as many antimatter particles as possible. So once you get up to 18 antimatter particles, you get that 90% damage reduction, but we're not relying on the damage reduction. So frankly, like I don't really care. You can use Null Star if you want, but you don't have to. The other thing is duration does affect molecular prime. So molecular prime is kind of like polarize or pillage even, where it has an initial radius or initial range, which is set by the range of the ability, but then how far it expands is actually set by your duration. So you're going to get way more effective range out of abilities like Pillage or Molecular Prime or Polarize by increasing your duration than by increasing your range. In addition, it just makes the effect last longer. It makes the like area that Molecular Prime covers longer. It makes the effect last longer when it comes into contact with enemies. So it just feels really good to have high duration on Nova, even if you're not optimizing around Null Star. So duration, obviously you want prime flow. So you could run preparation if you wanted to. So I'm actually running Zenuric. So one thing so as I said before, you can end up like running around a lot on Netracell missions, right? So if you're not killing enemies, even if you have energize, if you're not killing enemies, you could just run out of energy, right? So that's why I'm using Prime Surefooted because I'm not using Unairu. I'm using Zenuric and Energy Nexus. So the combination of those two is a really nice, consistent energy flow. And the reason why I went this over Streamline is if you're not killing enemies and getting energy orbs, you're not getting any energy to use anyways. So it doesn't matter if you have more efficiency. So I personally think Energy Nexus is just better. You can also try and time up your Molecular Prime casts with the one Zenuric node where you get a free ability every minute, I think. So because it's 100 energy, like it can kind of be nice for that, but it's not, you don't need to really think about that if you don't want to. So now as far as like defensive stuff, so I'm running primed redirection. The reason why is it gets me up to 2.36 seconds of immunity when my shields break. So if you don't have primed redirection, it's only 1.3, which is kind of poo-poo. So you don't want that. You want more because Some frames can get away with lower immunity times because they're spamming abilities. Once again, Nova is not doing that. You're basically only using Pillage when you have to regen your shields, or a really critical component of Pillage that's overlooked pretty frequently but is very important for the Netracell missions is stripping or cleansing status effects. That's really, really nice because a couple of the key glyphs, so the electricity one and the slash one, are pretty annoying. They can cause a lot of damage if you're not getting them off somehow. So I think Pillage is just such a great fit for this build because it's strip. You don't really care about the defense strip because you have such low strength. It's not doing anything in that regard, but it is stripping. You know, enemies are so high level in Netracells that even though your strength is so low, you're still gonna get max shields and max overshields when you use this. Plus, it's a bug. It's not actually zero energy. It's 50. It's just a bug because it's a Helminth. But you are getting some amount of shields back. So adaptation is just that little bit of extra, tankiness because you really could run something else here, but because you really don't want to die on this mission, I've liked adaptation to just be super comfy, like very, very tanky. Don't really have to worry about it. If it's not a Netracell mission and there's not that threat of dying, you can replace this with anything you want. I know like a pretty common complaint about builds guides is that the arcanes are really expensive. So it's a lot easier to get arcanes now through Lloyd. You also could drop Arcane Energize and Arcane Aegis, frankly. So just use whatever arcanes you have that fit the build. You want to look for, maybe you could use the Molt Efficiency from the Zeramon for a little extra duration, or whatever, some other arcane that's a little easier to get until you get these ones. I personally think these two are the best for this build because it's nice to get that big chunk of energy back, especially because some of your abilities are pretty expensive. When you need to go find the Netra whatever, the little drone thing that's really annoying, it's nice to have max your energy topped off so you can wormhole back and forth. Same thing, Molecular Prime is pretty expensive. And then Arcane Aegis is just absolutely ridiculous survivability because you're constantly regenerating shields with Pillage and some from Breach Respite. You have good damage reduction on your shields from the native 25% DR on shields plus adaptation, plus you have this huge invulnerability shield break window. Arcane Aegis basically makes you immortal, while it's up. So it's a very strong arcane for any kind of shield tanking build. And then there's another critical ability or critical mod. Basically, have to have this is overextended. So for anybody who doesn't know, Molecular Prime has a slow component to it, and that component will scale with your strength, but it will also go below 0 if you have strength under 100%. So what that does is it speeds enemies up instead of slowing them down. So that's the difference between Slova is high strength and Speedva is low strength. So you intentionally tank your strength with overextended, and then you make enemies faster. And it's actually really nice because you want to bring enemies into that red circle as fast as possible. So this is really nice in groups. Enemies are kind of just waddling their way towards the red circle. You're like, come on, get in here so I can kill you and progress the Netracell. But this helps a lot. So I've really, really, really liked Speedva. Now, one final thing about this build. Now, this is one of my favorite new mods. I absolutely love this mod. I think it's really flexible. It's awesome. So let's say you want to play Slova instead of Speedva. Literally all you have to do is swap these two mods. And now you have a max slow Molecular Prime, and that's that. And then you could switch to Molecular Fission if you want, whatever. Doesn't matter. That's all you got to do is swap those two mods, and boom, you're good to go. So yeah, I think I've really, really, really liked this build for Netracells. Now, as I said, don't care about the weapons. You can do whatever you want. I'm running a Hound. I've talked about that a few times. It's really good for spreading status effects. Running Zeneric for the energy regen. So you don't have any energy over time effects on this build. So it's really nice to regen your energy, especially when you're like zipping around the map. Now the other frame that I've loved for Netracells is I didn't talk about Archon shards. So for Nova, you can use whatever you want. It doesn't matter. You can use more duration. You can use whatever. I forget what I'm using on her. Don't use strength. Do not use strength shards. That's the one thing you do not want to do on Nova is run strength shards. One thing I haven't tested, so I know her 4 does blast damage when the explosions trigger. I don't know if it applies the blast status effect. So you might be able to get a little extra shield gen if you put the orange Archon shards on Nova. I don't know if that actually works though. So now Titania is really nice for similar reasons. So one, incredibly fast. She's the fastest Warframe. So running around with Razorwing Blitz is like an almost uncontrollable amount of speed. You basically have to turn sprint off to actually navigate through missions. But because, and like, Gauss is really fast and Volt and Wukong are really fast, but Titania just can navigate not only like XY quickly, but also she doesn't give a crap about any kind of like Z-axis stuff, right? And that the new tile set is just full of that. So it's very easy to navigate around with her. She can scale her speed with strength. Whereas like Wukong, yeah, he can stay in Cloudwalker longer, but he can't really like scale up his speed at all. So Wukong is very fast and he's a very good Warframe. Gauss and Volt are very fast. They're also very good frames. But Titania is kind of in a league of her own. Now, this is like a pretty meta build. As you can see, I'm using Nourish. So Nourish is getting nerfed. Frankly, I was thinking about this last night, and I don't think like they would have to nerf Nourish to like comical levels for it to not still be good. Um, I don't think I would replace it for anything else on this build. It's just that strong, which is kind of the reason why it needs to get nerfed. So, one very useful thing for Titania is having 2 Emerald Archon shards. They can just be normal. You need 2 anyways. Even if they're Tau Forged, you need 4 stacks, and the Tau Forged only give you 3. You need 4 extra stacks to have max armor strip. So this is very, very nice. It works amazingly well with Dex Pixia. Lets you full strip armor with it. So I guess I'll just show the Dex Pixia build first. So this is a toxin focused Dex Pixia build. So very high status and very high toxin. And the other element I decided to put on here was radiation. So enemies in Netracells are weak to radiation damage. And why toxin? So I'll get to that in a second. So these are pretty standard mods, galvanized diffusion, galvanized shot, 60/60s. I used the toxin 60/60 and pathogen rounds. Maybe we'll get a primed pathogen round someday, so that I could get the best weighting for toxin. Now, another mod you could try and work in is Carnus Stinger. The problem with Carnus Stinger is that if you use this, you basically have to replace one of these. And you don't really want to do that because that's going to, like, if you cut one of these, you basically have to cut both because you can't just run one because toxin is a base element. So you have to have a combined element here instead of just one element. So if you run Carnus Stinger, it's like, what do you put in this other slot? You're not running crit. I don't think crit is really worth it on Titania's weapons, honestly. Crit is best when you're like scaling up slash, I feel like, and this weapon is stripping armor, so you don't really care about slash. Like damage has not been an issue for this build. So the other thing is it's really nice to have punch through on Titania because you're basically like single target with your pistols, but in the Netracells, I mean, or really in general, there's a lot of hallways, and you can kind of line up your shots and be killing multiple enemies at once. And it's also very nice to proc a certain arcane I will talk about in a little bit here. So, also, why Toxin? Well, that's because of Archon continuity. It's like, why are you using Toxin when you have a Emerald Archon shard? That doesn't make any sense. Well, Archon continuity makes it so that any abilities that inflict a Toxin status will also apply corrosive status. And as far as Archon shards are concerned, um, weapons like Dex Pixia or any kind of exalted weapon are abilities. So the damage they do is actually considered an ability, like Mesa or whatever. So you can go full Toxin and be getting Toxin from your guns, radiation. You still get a lot of slash because they have a lot of slash weighting. Get corrosive from Archon continuity, and you're getting viral from Nourish. That's why Nourish is so insane with this build. It's like Toxin isn't usually that great, but when you're completely stripping enemy armor and you're able to full stack corrosive and viral, Toxin is all of a sudden very strong. So yeah, this build has not lacked in damage whatsoever. It has been absolutely bonkers how well this build has worked. So you might be seeing a lot of weird mods on this build and be thinking like, what the actual flip is going on? Now, this build does not have Arcane Energize because I'm running Nourish. So I don't really need Energize. I have never had energy problems on this build. Sometimes if you're doing it solo and you get the energy loss key glyph, you might run into energy problems while you're running around the map. But all I do then is I just get out of Razorwing. I drop so I'm actually running Zenuric with this as well. I dropped on my Zenuric 1 and I just like, because I have Nourish, it's regenning twice as much energy. So it actually fills my energy back up at like a pretty reasonable pace. So, but that's pretty rare. It's you have to be pretty unlucky, but it can happen. So it's nice to have Zenuric plus Nourish as like a backup plan. Now, this arcane is, I'm sorry, I think this is basically mandatory for Titania. I've talked about this before. I really wish they just gave her pistols infinite ammo. No other exalted weapon has that kind of limitation. Like Mesa has infinite ammo. Like it's kind of weird that Titania has this like weird limitation when she's definitely not a bad frame, but she's not like the most meta frame in the universe either. And you basically just cheese infinite ammo anyways with Arcane Pistolier. So having the punch through makes procking Arcane Pistolier much, 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 much easier. So the enemies in the new tile set are a little weird. You want to make sure you know where the weak spots are on all those enemies, so you can trigger Arcane Pistolier. Because headshot, like the head location on different enemies, can be a little strange. So as far as the mods go, so like Titania is obviously always airborne. Now, what did I say about Nova? Like, you want mobility. Well, Titania has mobility like innately, and you don't want to die. As far as bringing enemies into the circle, Titania doesn't really help with that. But she's very tanky and she's very good at moving around, getting all the consoles before you find the Netracell, getting the Necromites that spawn. She's super good at that. Especially because a lot of Necromites spawn in like really annoyingly high up locations. Like I feel like it's kind of annoying that they do that. If they're like hidden like above the lights and stuff, it's really, really silly. I hope they change that. Honestly, it's kind of dumb, but it is what it is. So, preparation, incredible, because on Nova I was running Energy Nexus, so I didn't really care. I didn't, want preparation on that build because I had Energy Nexus and Zenuric running, so my energy was going to fill up pretty fast as I was moving around the map. With this build, you're going into Razorwing right away, so you want preparation. Now, yeah, so you want preparation to just cap out your energy. So another thing is, some of the key glyph effects are reduced by damage reduction. So like, why am I running Boreal's Hatred, right? So the reason I'm running this is because one, it buffs up my shields a little bit, gives me a little bit of efficiency, and the set bonus for the Boreal set is reduces damage when you're airborne. So aerodynamic, also reduce damage while airborne. Aviator, reduce damage while airborne. And so like this is a little bit of a weird build, but just bear with me. So primed flow you is really nice to pair with preparation. I already covered Archon continuity. Duration is really nice on this build. You don't have anything that scales with range. You don't care about range at all. So having Nourish last longer, duration also lets you skip stacking efficiency because you don't really care because your energy per second is already so low from such a high duration. So narrow-minded and Archon continuity are really great. Once again, you don't really care. I mean, you care about strength for Nourish like a little bit, but honestly, I'd rather just have the extra strength on Razorwing. So once again, I'm using Precision Intensify, and this is kind of like a twofer because the base damage from Razorwing scales off of obviously the strength for her 4, but Razorwing Blitz is also attached to her 4. So Precision Intensify is also buffing Razorwing Blitz. So this is just like the most value mod ever on Titania. It is absolutely fantastic. So you're basically getting a 2-for-1. Obviously, you're using Razorwing Blitz. This is like basically every single Titania build uses this mod. Crazy movement speed, crazy fire rate. When you combine this with the free ammo from Arcane Pistolier, it's just absolutely insane amounts of damage. And then fast deflection. So why fast deflection? So this is like I've been testing out these shield recharge mods lately because they got buffed significantly. Now, why shield recharge? That's kind of weird, right? So one thing is Titania is immune to status effects. So this is I've heard people complain about running into walls with Titania. If you hold Spellbind and you will self cast it, and you will be immune to status effects. And that includes running into walls. You will no longer like stagger yourself from doing that. So self-casting Spellbind to keep your status immunity up is a absolutely critical component to playing Titania. It also makes you like way tankier because some of the things that do the most damage at high levels are like Eximus unit, heat blasts and like heat procs and stuff like that. Like those can do crazy damage. So being completely immune to status effects, which includes knockdowns, is amazing. Obviously Nourish, everybody knows Nourish. It's more energy for this build is awesome, and then Viral is awesome. Um, so one thing with Razorwing, so I don't. Oh yeah, so you see right here. So it says evasion 50%, and then there's also a buff for your tribute. So your tribute doesn't really scale with anything either. Most of these values are just fixed, no matter what your mods are. Um, so one of the things on here, which is really the only one I use most of the time, is Dust, which is hit chance minus 50%. Um, so it basically has like an aura around you that decreases enemy accuracy. So when you combine that with Razorwing's innate 50% evasion, frankly, you just rarely get hit at all on Titania. You basically never get hit. With this much damage reduction, your shields rarely ever break. And if they do break, they are going to regen insanely fast, even without an Arcane Aegis proc. So you don't have to run Aegis for this build. I'm just once again being overly cautious because you really can't die in these missions. I think Arcane Pistolier is unfortunately it's a totally different experience playing Titania if you have this mod versus or have this arcane versus not having this arcane. So if you want to play Titania, just like suck it up and get this arcane. It kind of sucks, but especially because the pack you get this from Lloyd is like doesn't really have other good arcanes in it, so it feels really bad. But Titania is an extremely good frame. She's really good at farming stuff. Really good whenever a prime comes out. She's always my go-to for like relic runs and stuff. So it's worth spending a little time on Titania. She's an amazing frame. So because of all the evasion she has, that's why I was trying out fast deflection. And I kind of tried it out as like a bit of a meme at first, and then I was like, wait, this is actually incredible. Like I'm rarely ever getting hit, and when I do, like I'm almost never getting hit enough for my shields to not fully recharge before I get hit again. So it really like it's pretty awesome. I've actually really enjoyed this mod on Titania. So this one's a little bit of a weirder mod setup. It's not going to help you as much to get enemies in to the red circle, but you know if you're playing solo, you can kind of just stand in the middle or whatever. But yeah, so I've really enjoyed Titania. Obviously, her weapons don't matter at all. Um, so Titania, Nova, two really good options for Netracells, either solo or in groups. So yeah, hopefully this improves your Netracell experience. Definitely let me know if there's any other frames that you've tried that you think are really good for Netracells, or maybe are really promising for the new missions that are coming in the next patch. I'm also very excited for the Inaros rework. I actually really like Inaros. Unironically, I'm excited. I hope that he is much better than he is right now. So yeah, looking forward to the next patch, and hopefully this is useful info. And as always, thanks for watching. So see you around.